We decided to take the summer to do just kind of romp our way through Genesis 1 through 11. And I've said this before, but for those of you who are new, we do it because no one reads Genesis 1 through 11. And it's sort of fallen out of favor in the Christian camp because most Christians feel like, I can't talk about Genesis 1 through 11 because I can't scientifically defend it. Well, what do you mean? Well, like the 6 days of creation and God rests on the seventh day. Well, what do you mean? Well, like Noah and the ark and stuff. I can't scientifically, and since the culture says science is the ultimate source of truth, and I can't scientifically defend it, let's just act like Genesis starts in chapter 12. Well, no, because it's really super important that you get 1 through 11, because let me give you the takeaway so far in terms of the 5 first chapters. Chapter 1, God creates the heaven and the earth. That means we have a creator. And when you have a creator and designer, that means there's a purpose. And if there's a purpose, then it's all going to wrap up in that purpose. I used to be a designer of electrical products for 20 years. And when you designed something, it had a purpose. It was structured for a reason. It had an end. So since this place we live in isn't just a random, chaotic mistake in the universe, but God actually, in Genesis 1, made it and designed it and carefully constructed it, then implicitly there's a purpose. And that's the big takeaway from Genesis 1. Don't forget about long earth, short earth. That's the big takeaway. God made this place, and so he's got something in the back of his mind for why we're here. When you get to chapter 2, when he creates man, you find out that thing behind the whole plan is God to have a relationship with his creature who is man. I mean, it's structured for him to have a relationship with us. It's even hinted at in chapter 1 when he creates in 6 days, and on the seventh day he rests. Well, what do you think he's waiting for on the seventh day when he rests? Us. Jesus says the Sabbath, that's the seventh day in the creation, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So clearly, this seventh day of rest is God saying, I've got the whole thing humming, everything's there. Now, with my undivided attention, I want to be with you. And sure enough, we see Adam and Eve walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and they're relating to God, and it's a wonderful thing. But that whole plan falls apart when man rebels, right? And Satan, as the serpent, comes in and lies to man at the time. Adam and Eve lies to him and says, listen, you're being kept down. This is Jim's rendition. You're being kept down and unaware because God just doesn't want you to be in the same class that he is. Understanding good and evil. So eat of this apple, completely disregard his commandment, and you and God can be equals. That's really what he's saying. And God says, that's how it happens. So it turns out they get kicked out of the garden. This opportunity to walk with God goes away, and suddenly we're in this rebellion phase of mankind. And then when you get into chapters 3 and into 4 and into 5, mankind either goes tragically bad through Cain's line, the killing, Cain, or sort of through Seth's line, it looks like it might have hope, but we're still really not too sure. But there really is a clear distinction in mankind between those who want to walk with God and those who don't. And if you don't, the tragedy is all you get is yourself and not the fellowship and goodness of God. And that is Lord of the Flies. And we're going to see that today. That is a tragic society that deliberately stiff-armed itself from God the Creator and said, I know you made me, I know you gave me breath, but I don't want anything to do with you. I just want to be left alone. And God leaves them alone, and it all goes to pot. So that's where we're at today, in fact. So really the message in Genesis is God started this place in order to have relationship with us. We messed it up, and then we're not just blaming Adam and Eve. We would have done the same thing in their place. We messed it up and decided to stiff-arm God. And now God has started this process that will end up working its way toward redeeming us back to him and solving the problem of our own rebellion through Christ, and we're back to fellowship with him. That's the whole idea. So that's where we are. In Genesis, we shouldn't really focus on, is it scientifically credible? Although, speaking now with my scientist hat on, because that's what I did, it has lots of reason to be credible. And with my scientist hat on, evolution has a lot of reasons not to be credible. And I've read them. So you have to take the science thing with a grain of salt. But that being said, what God tells us about the creation ought to have some kind of support in science. And it does with my scientific hat. But that's not our focus today. We focus on that and we miss the big point. God started the whole thing so he can have relationship with us. And he solved our own problem. Today, we continue that. So we get off the solar system there. If you look at Genesis 1 through 11, there's really only 4 topics: the creation, the fall of mankind, the flood, and the Tower of Babel. And then you're at Abraham, and the nation of Israel. So today we're on chapter 6, and as we spin our world, we're actually starting the entire topic of, dun, 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 the flood. So that's where we are today, at the flood. So let's just open this up. I'm going to actually skip in chapter 6 to verse 5, because he gives a better overview. He says, and I'll come back to 1, don't worry. He says, then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth. He couldn't use a larger Hebrew word than that. It was stupendously huge and pervasive on the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Evil continually. Evil continually. The Lord was sorry that he'd made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. So that's where we are now. We're 10 generations after Adam, and the intent. You notice he doesn't just say that what people are doing is evil, the works of their hands. That's implied. What he really makes a point of is their minds and their hearts dwell on doing evil. And if you recall back to the entire theme of the entire Bible, God looks at our hearts, not just on our actions. So if you're overly concerned in keeping your actions clean without being concerned about the intents of your heart, you're missing it, because God looks at the intents of your heart. And he looks at this congregation of people on the earth, and he says, their intent of their heart, which means that it's actually an idea of design. The designs of their heart are to do evil. If they're not doing evil right now, they're thinking about how they can do it tomorrow. That's the state of mankind. That's the state of mankind. Evil continually. And he was sorry that he'd made man on earth. He was grieved in his heart. Now, when it says, I like this word grieved. I say this at funerals all the time. If you don't know the person who just died, you usually don't grieve much. Have you noticed that? If you love the person deeply, you grieve. Grief is a love word, is what it is. It's a result of loss of someone you love. So when God is grieved, what's he saying? This God who loves us tremendously because of the loss of this evil is grieved. If God didn't love us, he wouldn't be grieved. He'd just be ticked off. And he's not ticked off. Well, he is ticked off, but he's not ticked off. He's fundamentally grieving over the loss of a loved one. That's what it's saying. Again, it's reinforcing that God's perspective on us is that he loves us, even though we're deeply falling. And so this loss due to sin grieves him because he loses his loved ones. Evil continually. So we really need to go back to the fall, because we're kind of cleaning up the end of the fall here, I suppose. So let's clean up the end of the fall. Verse 7, the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, from man to animals to creeping things to birds of the sky. I'm sorry that I have made them. Why take out all the animals? Aren't we the ones at fault? But if you remember, man is put in place, and one of his jobs is to rule over the animals, to caretake for them. And so there's something implied here about the fact that when man turns into a complete mess up in that sense, ruined in that sense, he also ruins his relationship with all the animals, and the animals themselves go through some kind of fall. And the closest thing I can connect to this is, when I walk in here in the morning, I walk to the church every day. It's like a 3-mile round trip. I walk here. I can tell you where every dog is between my house and here. Really. And so I actually cross the street in front of some houses because I know there's a dog there that's many times not kept, in the backyard, and has come out and chased me, and I've defended myself by kicking the dog. I mean, that's how bad it is. I'm not looking at you when I say about you. Okay. So yours is just loud. But I know where all the dogs are. So here's the deal. There are some dogs that I walk past who are capable of doing me great damage, but somehow in the way they were raised, they're gentle, they're alert, they see me, but they don't try to attack me. Other dogs, who I believe are different because of the way they're raised, attack me. So there is a real sense in which man who is in charge of keeping these animals can make the animals corrupted in a sense. See what I'm saying? That's my closest connection to this. I don't completely understand this, but God says, since mankind fell and he was in charge of the animals, I'm taking them all out. All of them. So that's where he's at right here. I'm sorry that I have made them. But there's a backstory I skipped over in verses 1 and 2 about this evil continually. And let's just look at that. It's interesting stuff. Verse 1, it came about that when men began to multiply on the face of the land and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves whomever they chose. At which point, when you read that, you should scratch your heads a little bit. Because you should think, well, okay, so you got these generations, so there's women there, and you marry them. But what the odd thing about this is the sons of God. This phrase, this sons of God, this Benah Elohim, that phrase is only used one other place in the entire Bible, in terms of the Hebrew phrase, sons of God. And it's used in Job, and it's used 3 times in Job, and it always means angels in Job. So if we use our biblical exposition, we tie these things together, because the Bible has to be self-supporting in that sense. Is he saying that angels saw that the daughters of men were beautiful and they took them as wives? Angels took them as wives? It looks like it. But what kind of angels? Well, for one thing, he gives us a clue. These are probably not good angels, because they're taking women without the permission of the parents. The whole thing about when you get married in the ancient culture, it's really a family-to-family kind of negotiation that happens in this whole thing. You don't just come in and say, "You're pretty," and you grab the woman. Some cultures do that. Okay, I'll give them allowance for that. But in this particular culture, that is obscene. That is obscene. So what he's saying is that some spiritual beings, angels are our closest guess, who are not really benevolent toward us, are taking women for wives without anyone's permission. Whoever they want. And that's obscene. He'll talk about it more in a second here. But commentators really debate on this, but no one gets away from the fact that we're talking spiritual beings, probably demons. Those are angels that have fell with Satan from heaven. They were created beings, angels, spiritual beings. They now are intent, along with Satan, to do harm to mankind. Somehow in this process, they have figured out how to marry and take women. Now, there's an aside to this. Many people, and I think I go with this, think that this isn't just angels. This is fallen angels who inhabit the bodies of men. Now, why do we say that? Well, you go to the New Testament, and Jesus is casting out demons out of people left and right that completely control their lives. You remember that one guy who's across the lake, across the Sea of Galilee, across the lake, and he's out there, he's naked, he's jumping around on gravestones, he's cutting himself and hitting himself. He's stronger than anyone around, and no one even wants to try and tackle this guy. He was a man that was inhabited by these fallen angels, by these demons. And he's the guy that Jesus prays for him, and the demons themselves say, well, send us somewhere, just don't cast us into oblivion. So he sends them into, remember that? Into the swine, and they self-destruct. That's what demonic possession is meant to do, is to self-destruct. So a lot of people think that these guys right here may have been men who were so depraved and evil to start with that it was easy targets for them to be fully inhabited by fallen angels, by demons. And in the process, did this very obscene thing of just snatching women left and right, whoever they wanted to, and procreated with them. And then the Lord said, "My spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he's flesh. It's also flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years." Before we find out a little bit more about those weird beings, God's looking at this and he says, I'm not going to strive with man forever. It's another way of him saying, my patience is only so far, is kind of what it is. It's only so much. So what he says is his days shall be 120 years. Now, a lot of people think what God's saying is, the lifespan of men is going to go from 900 that we looked at last week to 120. No, it's phrased wrong in the Hebrew. Almost every commentator says this means he's setting a clock from this point of this condemnation. He's setting a clock. He's like setting a kitchen timer, and it's set at 120 years, and then the flood will come. So this is really 120 years to get to the flood. So this is God's condemnation of mankind. The flood will come 120 years later. That's why he says, I can only take this so long. I can only strive so long with man. My patience is only so long. I give you 120 years, and that's it. 120 years, and that's it. And then more about these guys. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, there it is where we have the wives, and they bore children to them, and those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. So this very evil inhabitants of the earth, of God's creation, these demonically possessed, powerful men who did this obscene thing of snatching women wherever they wanted to, they had babies. And these babies seemed to have some kind of mighty renown, because it says they were the men of old, the men of renown. So what does all this mean? Could you write science fiction about this and sell millions of copies? You could. This is kind of crazy stuff. But here's what it's saying. There is a demonically possessed race of men who are having babies with women, and their offspring have some kind of more than natural power. They're men of renown. That's actually a phrase that's used for warriors and stuff like that. There's something very powerful about them. Now, if you have a King James Version, they will translate Nephilim as giants. As giants. Because, I think I've got it here. Yeah, right here in Numbers 13, it's the only other place this word Nephilim, which is that's the word in Hebrew. If you want to know how to pronounce Nephilim in Hebrew, it's Nephilim. That's the Hebrew. So that they just transliterate it. It shows up one other time when the 12 spies are sent into the land of promise, when they're after the wandering in the desert. Remember that? And here's what they come back with a report. And all the people whom we saw in it are men of great size. There also we saw the Nephilim, so that's the only other place in the Bible we see it. The sons of Anak are part of the Nephilim. And we became like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight as well. So that's why the King James calls the Nephilim giants, because here it says the Nephilim, they're big guys, big dudes. Sons of Anak shows up in other places as well. So the very people that they saw when the spies went into the land and said, "Great land, but big people. I don't know if we can do this." And that was Caleb and Joshua. Yeah, Joshua and Caleb, right? And they were the two spies out of the 12 that said, "No, we can take them because we have God." So that cost them 40 years in the wilderness after that point. So I said before. It's after that point. So here's where the Nephilim show up again. Again, they are when you look at them, they are imposing, large, powerful, historically legendary, incredible beings. Now, as an aside, when you do a little bit of anthropology worldwide, you find that there are, in ancient times, very, very large people that inhabit all the continents of the world. In fact, you can go in the United States, you can find graves, and now we're talking way back, graves of people who are like anywhere from 10 to 15 feet tall. 10 to 15 feet tall. If you want to know how tall that is, if you look up at our steel girders here, the bottom of these steel girders are at 12 feet. So they were 3 feet taller than that. Big people. What? And in fact, there is some legend, and this is only legend just to kind of spice this up a little bit, but there's a legend that, you know how the Native Americans here, the Hollywood said that when a Native American would come up to you in the movies, you know remember how they greeted you? How? No. But there is some fact behind some of the tribes, not all of them, who were in the Americas, where their greeting was just to go like this. And the reason they did that was so they could count your fingers, because the giants had 6 fingers instead of 5. Yes, that's legend. But I'll just put that out there. There's ample reason to believe that these large people did exist, and we found beds of them. I mean, they're 12 feet long. So anyway, were those, was that Anak? Was that the Nephilim? I don't know. But there is anthropological belief that there was a race of very large people. I need to point your attention to this. It says they were on the earth in those days and also afterward. What are they talking about? Well, what we just saw here in the spies report. That was long past the flood. So evidently they showed up before the flood. Antediluvian, I've been waiting to use that word, before the flood, and they also show up after the flood when the nation of Israel goes in to occupy the land. So whoever these people are, now we have a fundamental problem. How did they survive the flood? Well, if it's demon possession, quite easily, because it wasn't a human race that survived. It was the demonic possession that just jumped over the flood and started happening to a new bunch of people. That's how it works. Otherwise, they survived the flood by living underground, which are some theories. We don't have any substantiation for that. It could be many things, but really, if it's demon possession, that can hop all of those events. So they show up again at the time, occupying the land of Israel. Anyway, they are part of the problem for why there's evil continually on the earth. Incredibly evil, wicked people who not only actively pursue evil, but they're thinking about how to do it again next time. Ever met anyone like that? I've read about some. I hope to never meet any like that. Okay, so let's push on. In verse 8, there's this gigantic but right here. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. So everyone on earth, except Noah, apparently, is seeking to do evil continually, but there's something different about Noah. There's something different about... And so at this point in the story, it turns from a judgment story into a salvation story. Because from this point on, it's all about saving Noah and his family and the animals. It's all about salvation in the midst of the wrath of God. Okay? And keep that in mind because we're going to come back to that at the end. This is fundamentally a salvation story at this point. So let's take a look and see. Now we're at the flood. Okay. Well, these are the records of the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his time. Noah walked with God. Noah became the father of 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. They'll show up again in about 3 or 4 chapters. But notice, here's the distinction about why God gave regard to Noah. He was a righteous man. What did it mean? He was perfect and sinless? No, that's not exactly what that word means. But it does mean that his heart was not designing evil continually. It was seeking good and God's good continually. That's what warmed his heart. And that second phrase, blameless, really means whole. Does it mean he's sinless? No, but it means that in the sense that he has not been, how do you put this, become tainted and decrepit and ruined by what everyone else is pursuing. He's remaining a whole person. That's what that's all about. So God looks at him and says, man, you're really different. You're really different. So we're going to do something about that. So verse 11, now the earth was corrupt in the sight of God, and the earth was filled with violence. That's the outcome of all that stuff. God looked on the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way upon the earth. What word gets repeated multiple times here? Yeah, corrupt. And it's a wonderfully bad word. It means all of these things put together. Rotten, ruined, decayed, wasted, and eventually destroyed. So if you take fresh vegetables from your garden and you put them on the counter in your kitchen instead of putting them in the fridge, they will eventually become this. Compost. We should put compost up there. Yeah, they're ruined. They're ruined. And the whole idea here is God's looking at mankind and saying he's ruined himself. He's like a rotten tomato on the counter. He's mush. Look what he's done to himself. He's done all these things thinking that he's in control of things. God, I don't need you. I'm going to make my own world. And in making his own world, he makes Lord of the Flies, and he's become mush. This is man left unattended by God, who chooses to leave God out of the picture. He self-decays. He self-destructs. He self-mushes. And that's what we are as well. Without God, without the best thinking in our minds about what's good for us, we choose wrong all the time, thinking it's right. And in choosing wrong, we're like a moldy old tomato on the counter that's just all, ugh. Now, when God looks at mankind at this point, he sees mankind as that rotten tomato on the counter. Ugh. Ugh. Ah. If you run into someone in your life, and maybe I don't know if you have, I have several times, people who have decided to live lives of total corruption, in the end, their lives are just, it's gush, it's stinky, it's ruined. You see that. You actually see that. And that person didn't get there accidentally. They chose, bit at a time, to get there, to get there. Bill Cosby does a great thing. It's called Bill Cosby Himself. It's an old video, a stage thing. And he talks about people at work on Friday. They're all talking about, hey, what are you going to do this weekend? Oh, I'm going to go out to the bar and get drunk on Saturday. And then he does his whole routine where he talks about, okay, now here you are at the bar and you're getting drunk. And then, before you can even leave the bar, you have to go in the bathroom, and he says, here you are kneeling in front of the toilet, and you're just letting it all go right there. And then right in the middle of that, he looks up and says, remember, you promised yourself this on Friday. What? Exactly. Our best choices bring ruin in our life. Afterward, you say, what was I thinking? But why didn't you say that before you did that? What am I thinking? You don't do that until the consequences come to you. Remember, you promised yourself this on Friday. Woo-hoo. So the end of mankind left without the goodness of God is ruin. ruin. We do this to ourselves. I say this really clearly at this point because an amazing thing is going to happen with this word in just a second. But I want you to remember, God didn't make them become corrupted. They chose it. They chose ruination. It has nothing to do at this point with the wrath of God. They chose this. And just like Bill Cosby with his character kneeling in front of the toilet, throwing up, this is what they chose. Okay? Keep that in mind. Then God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence because of them, and behold, I'm about to destroy them with the earth. Wait a second. Destroy them. Okay. You know what that word right there is? It's exactly the same word we just looked at on corrupt. But it's finishing the job. So what he's saying is, man has chosen self-destruction and ruination, and God's going to come and say, okay, I'll let you have the whole guacamole. I'm going to destroy it. If you want ruination, I'll give you ruination. That's Romans 1. Hey, I'll show you that in a second. And he says, I'm going to destroy them with the earth. That's odd. See, if I was God and I was writing the Bible, I know you're tired of me saying this, you know what I would have done? I would have looked at all mankind who was really nasty, and I would have gotten, thunderbolts or something, or my incredible, disintegration ray gun or something, and I would just kind of, and they'd all be gone, save all the animals and stuff like that, start all over some way. Forget the flood thing. That's really messy. But God says, I'm going to destroy them with the earth. And that's a curious thing. Why? Why with the earth? And there's some theology in this. And we're going to take a second just to dwindle on this for a second. Dwindle? Dwell. That's exactly right. So hold on to that thought because he answers that question for us just in a little bit. Why didn't God use his disintegrator ray? Why did he use the flood? We'll come back. So hold that thought. For 14. So he tells Noah, here's the instructions. Make for yourself an ark of gopher wood. You shall make the ark with rooms, actually nests in Hebrew, nests, and shall cover it inside and out. That doesn't mean it was just chickens. And shall cover it inside and out with pitch, and this is how you shall make it. The length of the ark will be 100 cubits, 300 cubits, and its breadth 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. So he gives them the instructions for how to weather this storm of wrath that's coming. By the way, if you look up there, gopher wood, you know what kind of wood that is? Gopher wood. We haven't got a clue what it is. The word in Hebrew is gopher. Go figure. No one knows what it is. Gopher wood? And some of your translations might take a stab and say it's cedar, but it doesn't say the Hebrew word for cedar. It says gopher. We had no clue. We had to go for it? I don't know. That's bad. So we don't know what it is. But that's not really relevant. All we know is he used wood, okay? And then he covered it with pitch. And that actually scientifically makes sense. We do that to this very day when we build houses. There's a concrete foundation for a house, and to waterproof that foundation, what are they putting on it? This tar stuff is very much like the pitch. We do it to this very day. It makes it waterproof. And that's how water keeps from coming in your basement if someone does that right. If you ever have a house built and they build a foundation with a basement and they don't do this, call them on it because your basement's going to be drippy the rest of your life. Okay, so you put this pitch stuff on. So that actually makes sense. I can scientifically validate that putting pitch on the outside of a boat is a good idea because we do it to this very day. But what about this length? Well, a cubit is that long. It's from your elbow to the tips of your fingers. And that's roughly about 18 inches. So as an equivalent, we use 18 inches so when you see a cubit, think of 1.5 feet rather than just a foot because it's this far. Also, things were measured at the time by the width of the inside of the hand and by the span of the hand. So that's why there's other little things on there showing that. So cubits. So he says, here's the deal. I'm going to give you the dimensions. You got to make it this big. These many cubits. So that many cubits, 300 cubits by 50 cubits by a height of 30 cubits comes out to 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet tall. That is a big boat. And just to give you an idea, here's a satellite picture of our block. And right there in the middle, that's Main Street Church. And on the left there, that's the Dance Academy, with grass around it. And then over there on the far right, that's City Hall, right over there. So if you were going to pull the ark onto Main Street, it would be, about this big. It would go from sidewalk to sidewalk and go from, the Zions Bank parking lot at the edge of Dance Academy all the way over to City Hall and be as tall as the Wells Fargo building across the street. So next time you go out front, look at the Wells Fargo building, and then extend that as a boat sitting between the sidewalks right out in front of the building here, from the middle of the sidewalk to the middle of the sidewalk on the other side, and going that entire block. It's a big boat. By the way, too, a friend of mine came out of the Navy, and he looked at this a while back. Part of the things he did in the Navy was actually engineering work for the Navy, and he says, it's not easy to make a boat that won't flip and capsize. It's very hard. If you don't do a boat hull just right, then when the boat starts to tip, and if there's any cargo inside that's not put in the hole just right, most boat designs will flip right over. Just flip right over. Like the Poseidon. Yeah, the Poseidon adventure. Anyway, that's what's going to happen. But he says, I've read some engineering studies, and this will not tip over. This is a seaworthy vessel. This will work just fine. You don't even have to do any hull design. If you just make that rectangular box like that, it's just fine. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, if you've ever been in, say, a rowboat, and someone gets up and starts to jostle the boat, it'll right itself pretty well unless you've got a real idiot on board, But if you get in a canoe and do that, boom, you're over, because the canoe doesn't have quite enough width. So it's really, the hull design's a really big deal to make a boat to keep from flipping. And the last thing you want to do in Noah's Ark, load it up with all those animals and all that manure, is to flip upside down. Let your imagination go. Okay, so there we go. There's the ark. It's a big job. How big a job? Maybe a 120-year job. Remember that? We talked about that before? It would take me a long time to do this. And so there you go. So, and it gives a few more specifications. You'll make a window for the ark and finish it to a cubit from the top. Set the door in the ark in the side of it, and then you'll make it with lower, second, and third deck. So here's kind of a little model. That's not a bad guess for what it's like. There's those windows in the top, that are a cubit from the top of the thing, and a side door and all that kind of jazz. It's not a bad guess. And the inside, again, not a bad guess. It had many levels in it, and that sort of makes sense. So that's how we build ships today in terms of cargo levels as well. And you put the heaviest stuff down on the bottom, which is why it's not an accident that in ships today you put the heaviest stuff, which is the engines, down in the bottom of the boat, because that's the heaviest. So anyway, it's a seaworthy vessel. Scientifically, it'll float and it won't capsize. 17, behold, even I am bringing the flood of water upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life from under heaven. Everything that is on the earth shall perish. Now, I emphasize that last line, everything on the earth shall perish, because there's a lot of interesting scientific theories today that this was not a global flood, it was just a local flood. Well, okay, but then how did everything perish? See, it says on the end, everything that's on the earth, not just in the neighborhood, shall perish. So it's when science says this couldn't have happened globally, you have to put that science and the reasons up against this pretty clear statement right here. So there actually are scientific reasons why it was the whole earth, but it gets criticized. But this is what I'm going to focus on. I am bringing a flood of water, and it's going to take out all the ones with the breath of life. That line, breath of life, does that ring a bell from Genesis to you? Do you remember that? Genesis 2, when God makes man. When God makes man, the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. And we talked about it then, but here's the metaphor of the breath thing. Ancient people always knew that you and I stayed alive as long as we had functioning mechanics, right? The kidneys worked, the head worked, all that kind of this whole machine right here, as long as that worked. But it wasn't alive until there was something special and invisible inside. And if you're ever with someone, when they pass away, it seems evident that before you have something invisible inside them that makes them who they are, and when they pass away, it's just the mechanics. So the reasoning from the ancients and for us, and even for scientists today, is there's something unseen that makes you who you are. Can't explain it. I've seen Christian doctors, research doctors say, yeah, there's evidence that there's something more to us than just the connections of neurons in our brain. That is not just what makes us who we are. There's something else going on. There's something else going on. And that's how the ancients looked at it. And they said, metaphorically, that's the breath. Why? Because it's invisible and it's inside you. And the ancients, being rocket scientists, knew that once you stopped breathing, you died. The breath was gone. So That's what we're talking about. There's some invisible thing. And where does that invisible thing that turns the mechanics of this body into a living creature, where does that come from? God himself. Now, the mechanism does as well. But clearly, you and I could play Dr. Frankenstein and put together pieces of a body, but we can't breathe life into it. And even at the point of death, scientists and medical researchers will say, I don't get it. Everything in the body is still functioning well enough that this person should stay alive, but at some point, and they'll say this, it seemed as though the person just gave up and they left. And they left behind a fully functioning mechanism that should have supported life, but something left. That something is something that comes directly from God. So here's what he's trying to say. On the earth at this time, all these evil people who plotted to do evil continually had been given these bodies from God, but more specifically, they had been given that invisible part that makes us alive. That comes directly from God. And what they did was they chose to disregard that ever came from God. Disregard that it ever came from God. Jeremiah 51, this breath of life thing. Every goldsmith is put to shame by his idols. His molten images, they're deceitful. There's no breath in them. You know, golden idols, there's no breath in them. But what he's really saying isn't just that gold idols can't breathe. He's saying they have no life. They have no thing that makes them alive. They're just mechanics. They're just a glob of gold that looks like a head. He goes on in another place, Psalm 150, verse 6. Let everything that has breath praise the Lord. Why? Because that breath was given to you by God. It's life on loan from the life giver. You and I, you can sum up how much the chemicals of your body are worth and how the different structures of your body are worth if you just gave all your body away in, organ transplants or something. But that still won't capture the fact that who you are is more than all that mechanics. That everything that has breath, that God has given life. Praise him. Why? Because you owe him for that life. You have life on loan from God. But the people who lived on the earth at that time, and by the way, in the secular world today, say, I do not have life on loan from God. Man is basically a collection of mechanics, and I am who I am, and I am just the sum total of the neuron connections in my mind. I'm just a piece of natural, physical stuff. There is nothing that comes, that animates me from God. God doesn't exist. And at that point, you've got a real problem. Now you have people who have life on loan from a creator God who are stiff-arming him and saying, I don't want you to be part of me. I'll take all the life you give me. I'll take all that I find myself in. I'm not responsible for the way I was created, but it's a wonderful thing, wonderfully created we are by him. But I'm going to shake my fist at you and say, but you don't exist. Leave me alone. Now that you've given me everything it takes for life. And you see, that's the problem. That's the rebellion of mankind, to disregard the God who breathes life into you. So it's a long way around to saying who he's going to take out is the ones that he has breathed life into. And what's the best way to do that? Oh, let me give you one more verse. Do I have one more verse? I forget. I'm about to destroy them with the earth. Let me give you one more verse. Romans 1. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and they worshiped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. So here they have the Creator himself has loaned to them this life, this breath of life. They stiff-arm him and say, no, you didn't. You don't even exist. I want to live life on my own. And so God says, okay, you want your life to be filled with the creation I've given here? I will fill you with my creation. I will take the breath out of your lungs and fill it with water. That's what he's saying. This is why he chose to use the creation. They chose to just take advantage of everything God had made and not give any credence to the fact that the very breath that they have comes from God. And God says, you want to be filled with creation instead of me? I'll fill you with creation. Breathe this in for a while. And they drowned. Be careful what you wish for, because God will give it to you until it destroys you. He goes on, 18, I will establish my covenant with you. First time this word is used in the Bible, covenant with you, and you shall enter the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you. He doesn't go on right here and tell us what that covenant is, but you can sort of guess right here. He's already told him, I'm going to destroy the earth, but you have found favor in my eyes. What you need to do is you need to build this gigantic boat. Could take you 120 years. And you guys get in there, and I'll take care of you. You've never built a boat in your life. You've never seen that much water in your life. So there's a covenant going on here that in its simplest sense, and we'll come back to this later, is God saying, I'm bringing destruction to those who do evil continually, but you I will save. That's the covenant. Now, what does he have to do in return? A covenant is really just a contract. I will do this if you will do this, and then this will happen. It's a contract, but it's always mutual. It has two parts to it. And we'll come back and talk about this at the very end. But we want to talk about what that contract is and what that covenant is with God. So let's go on. And every living thing of all flesh you shall bring two of every kind into the ark to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female, of the birds after their kind, of the animals after their kind, of every creeping thing on the ground after its kind. Two of every kind will come to you to keep them alive. And so here's Noah fulfilling the charge that God had given man through Adam, saying, here's all these animals, you got to take care of them. You got to take care of them. And by the way, since I'm wiping out the earth, you got to take care of these animals and bring them with you. That's part of your job. That's why I created you. So this is really an extension of that caretaking that he's always given to do that. By the way, how do you round up two of every kind? See the very last line? They came to him. Oh, great. Can you imagine waking up one morning and seeing this? 2x2 file coming down the road? Say, I can see Noah's wife saying, Noah, get up. Get up. There's animals. Yeah, we have a parade. So they came to him. By the way, too, from a scientific perspective, we're not talking about every one of the species that we in our taxonomy specify as a separate species. We're talking about animals who are more supersets of genes. For instance, let's talk dogs. Did he have one of every kind of dog on board? No, because dogs can interbreed, and they can swap genes around. There was at one time some super dog that had all the genes of all the dogs that have been bred separately to separate those genes. If you took every dog on the earth right now, and you had poodles mingling with chihuahuas, mingling with Rottweilers, you do all the things, at the end you'll get this one dog that's a mongrel. But it's actually got a superset of all the genes of all these dogs. So it's very likely what we're talking about is the species, the animal groups who are, they're beginning, they're the alpha of all the groups. They have a superset of all the genes that later on you can breed these and separate the genes, and that's how you get different species today. But we're talking about animals that breed with one another and not with each other. So there's a minimum set. Also, to minimize space on board and to minimize food and manure handling, you don't bring in adult animals, you bring in babies. Wow, that works. So it's scientifically possible to do this. Really, it really is.
So you're saying that in my head that these little babies are walking to...
Yes. I think as soon as the animals got to be maybe adolescent or younger, they're going to take off. Yeah. Crazy, huh? Yeah, it is. Okay. Keeps them alive. That's their task. Remember, he says back in Genesis 1, we need to let the man rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, cattle over the earth, every creeping thing. So this is his way of ruling and caring for them. Because God says, I want you to keep them alive with you. That's your task, is to keep them alive with you. Okay, we push on. Verse 21. Now as for you, take for yourself some of all food which is edible and gather to yourself, and it shall be for food for you and for them. So you have to have some kind of food stuff that won't spoil. My choice is Twinkies. But you can't buy those anymore, so instead what we do is you get grain. So there's dried food that's on board, something to feed themselves as well as the animals while they're there. And thus Noah did, as we close out the chapter, thus Noah did according to all that God had commanded him, and so he did. And we're going to spend the next 2 to 3 chapters talking about how Noah did that and how that worked out. And that's the salvation story of Noah and his family. Now, what I want us to think about right now as we close is this faith and works thing. I told you at the beginning we were going to talk about this covenant. What is it that saved Noah and his family? Now, if you're a works person, that is, you're saved by your works, what you'll say is Noah was saved because of all the things that he did. But is that accurate? It is true that if Noah had not done those things, he may not have been saved. So the interesting thing is that Noah says yes to God's promise and the plan that's unfolding through faith. He says, I accept what's going to happen. I understand you're going to save me. I understand these plans are meant to save me. I'm going to walk in a way that validates my belief in that. And that's what he did. He believed God when God said, I'm going to bring rain and it's going to flood. He'd never seen anything like that before. He had to take that on faith. He had to believe that God, who was telling him, was faithful to his word, that's exactly what's going to happen. So he took him at his word. Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. He takes God at his word, and he says, I believe that's going to happen. I believe that's true. And then he believes the most preposterous thing you can think of: build a boat 450 feet long, and I'm going to bring you all the animals that need to survive, and they're going to be with you on this boat until everything else on the earth is dead. And he believed that too. He believed that too. So much so that he started building this thing. To the mocking of the people that are around him. 120 years he's building this thing that's not a house. Looks like it's going to float, but I've never seen it. So he does it. So the faith and works issue with him is very clear. And very clearly, without an ark, Noah would have died. And yet the design of the ark, the materials for the ark, the smarts for the ark, everything about the ark comes from God. God provided salvation for Noah and his family with the ark. All Noah had to do was believe God and walk in a way in concert with that. And that's faith. Is Noah saved by his works? No, but his works are a natural outgrowth of his belief in his faith. See that? Same thing happens with Abraham. Same thing when the writer of Hebrews talks about Abraham's faith. He says, okay, Abraham believed God when God said, I'm going to make this nation out of you. But Abraham had to leave his established home. He had to believe God enough that his belief drove his action, and his entire life basically was in concert with what he believed. And that's what saved him, because he believed. But he believed, and it was evidenced in his actions. If you believe something and it's never evidenced in your actions, I would say you don't believe it. And the issue we use all the time, the one I use, is a friend of mine who was scared to fly. And they said, I'm not scared to fly. I walk down the jetway to the jet. But right when I get to that threshold to the jet, I lift my foot up and go, well, am I scared or am I not scared? At that point, if they are not scared to fly, they'll step on that plane. Their action will follow their belief. If you trust the plane, you'll walk on it. So there's something integrated in your life between what you believe and the outcomes of what you believe. And during Jesus' time especially, there was a horrible problem with hypocrites. Hypocrites, people who said one thing, said they believed one thing, but their actions didn't follow in integrity with those things. They weren't one with that. Do what I say, not what I do. Well, is what you say really what you believe? Not if it's not evidencing in your life. There should be some natural consequence. And yet, the consequence is not what saves you. It's the faith that does. So in Noah's case, this gigantic judgment is going to come upon the earth. Noah didn't save himself through his obedience. He was saved through his faith. And his faith orchestrated his obedience. If Noah didn't believe God to start with, then no amount of work on his part would ever save him. Ever. So it's a really good illustration of faith and works in that particular sense. And one last thing, and we'll close with this. This entire event of the flood is meant to prefigure the wrath of God still to come. Now, at the end of his story with the flood, God says, I won't take mankind down with water anymore. I promise. And he puts up a rainbow. We'll get to that. He says, I'm not with that. But he doesn't say, I'll never judge mankind ever again. He just says, I'm not going to do it with the creation here. But there's a time coming, and this is all prefigured in this, that if you and I, who have been given this incredible gift of understanding the New Testament and Jesus, look back, you know what we see when we see Noah and the flood? We see the judgment of God on those who chose ruinous lives, and God gave them over to ruinous lives in this massive judgment. And yet, a few will be saved by God's design in his ark, who, if we place ourselves into that ark, we survive the coming judgment. And who is the ark from the New Testament? Jesus. We place ourselves into him, and we survive the wrath of God in a generation that does nothing but continually thinks of evil. And Jesus is that ark. It turns out that some of the church fathers way back, 280 and stuff like that, they looked at the dimensions of the ark, right here, Noah's ark, and said, it looks like the dimensions of a man. It's about the same as the height and the width and the depth. I don't think so. Really skinny men. But they got it, even from the very earliest church fathers. They got it. This is a prefigure of a wrath that is still yet to come on mankind. And if mankind continues to stiff arm and shake his fist at God and say, you don't exist, tomorrow will be tomorrow, I'll rise up tomorrow, the sun will rise up, I'll have breath in my lungs because this is the world that always was and always will be, and there's no God involved in this world, there is no creator. One day they'll wake up like in Noah's time and say, what? I don't get it. Why is it all coming to an end? Well, because God's patience is not infinite. He will only let us go so far. And then judgment comes. He basically gives us what it says in Romans 1. He gives us over to what we wanted all along, which was self-destructive and ruinous to us. And God says, if that's what you want, if you want to stiff arm my goodness in your life, I'll make it an eternal thing. And that's judgment. It's only giving to man what he wants. Giving to man what he wants. But if you realize that the coming judgment, you won't survive. There's no amount of treading water, going back to Bill Cosby. How long can you tread water? There's no amount of treading water in the coming judgment to come that you're going to survive. Which means, translated, there's no amount of doing good in your life right now that will qualify you to float through the next judgment, because it's not going to happen. You can't do it. You need a vehicle of salvation designed by God for that very purpose. That if we place ourselves into him, which by the way is the word baptism, if we place ourselves into him, we can ride out that storm. But only for those like Noah who choose to walk with God. And then one last thing. You know how hard it is to walk with somebody? You ever walked with your spouse on the beach or something like that? There's only two things you have to do to walk with somebody. And this is true of walking with God as well. Number one, I'm going to state the obvious. You got to go the same direction they're going. Here, let me walk with you for a while. Psh, stupid. One is you just got to go the same direction. Walking with God is all about saying, God, I want to go where you're going. So I'm going to walk with you where you're going. I don't want to, as opposed to, I don't want to just go off and do my own thing and run over here. I've tried that. You know what? It ends up in ruin for me because I run into stupid things. Walking with God, number one, is about just walking the same direction he goes and to let him choose the direction. That's what we do when we give our lives to Christ. You're Lord of my life. Wherever you're going, that's where I want to go. I want to follow. That's number one. You got to go the same direction. You know what number two is? Don't walk any slower or any faster than he walks. You pace yourself by how he paces you. Dorothy and I have different length of legs. So when we walk places, it looks like this. Okay, that's an exaggeration. But that's pretty close. So one of us has to adapt to the other, and I got to tell you, Dorothy's not going to go long strides, so I go short strides. That's just a silly example. But there really is a sense in which when all the writers in the Old Testament say, wait upon the Lord, they're saying, go his pace. Don't run ahead. God, I want to know where we're going. When we're going to get there. And can I go? Bye. I'll see you later. I hope you catch up with me, God. Or you're so sleepy, he goes places you're going, oh, where did God go? No, it's about being attendant to who God is and saying, wait on the Lord. Go with him. Wait to where he goes, you know? If you've got some place that you need to be or you have something that's challenging your life, you say, well, I need to run around until my hair catches on fire. No. You need to go to God and say, God, what is it about this? Where are you taking me in this? This is what walking with God's all about. It's actually saying, I want to walk alongside you through this, and I'm not going to run ahead with my head like a chicken with its head cut off. I'm going to just sort of go and rely on you. Wait on the Lord, and you'll renew your strength. Yeah. So that's what Noah did. Did he believe in Jesus? He never heard the name Jesus. But he understood that there was a loving God who was committed to his good, that loved him, that he was willing to pace his life and set the direction of his life with God. And God said, I can work with someone like this. And that's all that God waits for with us, is to pace ourselves and walk alongside him and realize that there really is a coming judgment because the Creator himself has lent to us, and you don't disregard him and you don't say he doesn't exist, because that's to say, thanks for all the goods, God, but I don't want you. Walk with him. And as we walk with him, he places us in Christ. And when the following judgment comes, we survive that judgment. Why? Because we end up looking like the righteousness of Christ. Because we're in him. See, there's theology in Noah, and that's what it's all about. So don't get hung up on the technicalities of how do you get so many animals in the ark. What about those Nephilim? Boy, you could make a great graphic novel on this one. Woo-hoo-hoo! They probably had horns and stuff. Don't get hung up on all that stuff. That's interesting stuff. But get the clue. God is saying, I love you, and I want to preserve you through the coming judgment that's coming. All you need to do is walk with me. Trust me where I'm going. And that's it. That's it in a nutshell. Let me pray, and then I have one quick announcement I want to make before we separate out for lunch right here. So let me just pray. Father, we thank you for this incredible account. I pray that through your Spirit you would keep us focused on the important message you're trying to get across to us. And Lord, as I see Noah and his family inside this ark, bobbing through this incredible judgment, trusting in you to get them through it and to get them out on the other side of it. You who looks on Noah and looks on us with favor because our heart's desire is to walk with you, not to impress you with our good works, not to try and earn any kind of salvation or good thinking from you. It is none of that. Our choice is to say, God, not my way, your way. I want to walk with you. Lead the way, and my life will come from walking with you. Remind us, Lord, constantly of this. And Lord, I pray that as we continue on looking at Noah and the ark for the next couple of weeks, that you would impress upon us the big picture instead of just the little details and the scientific conundrums, and there's some, but they're not the point of the passage. And impress upon us that your plan for salvation for us as fallen men was established at the beginning of the world. At the beginning of the world. And when the time was just right, you sent your Son to be that ark for us. So thank you for all this now, and challenge our heart through your Spirit. Draw us closer to you and more in love with you as a result. So thanks for this now in Jesus' name. Amen.